What if the discomfort you feel when you skip meals isn't a warning, but a misunderstanding? Most of us believe eating frequently keeps our bodies alive and stable. Skip a meal and something must be wrong. But biology tells a very different story. For most of human history, the body was designed not for constant eating, but for waiting. So when you eat only once a day, your body doesn't panic because it's failing. It panics because it's waking up an ancient survival system it hasn't used in years. In this video, we'll break down what actually happens inside your body when you eat only once a day, hour by hour, cell by cell, and why hunger might not mean what you think it does. The moment you skip a meal, your body reacts fast. Not because it's running out of energy, but because it thinks something has changed in the environment. Within the first few hours, without food, a cascade of signals begins. Your stomach tightens. Your thoughts drift toward eating. You might feel lightheaded, restless, or irritable. To most people, this feels like proof that skipping meals is dangerous. But biologically, this reaction is not a sign of damage. It's a signal of expectation mismatch. Your body was expecting food, and it didn't arrive. One hormone is largely responsible for this early response, ghrelin. Ghrelin is often labeled the hunger hormone, but that description is incomplete. Ghrelin doesn't measure how much energy you have stored. It measures when you usually eat. Its release is tightly linked to routine, not depletion. If you normally eat breakfast at 8 a.m., ghrelin rises around that time, even if your body still has plenty of stored energy. Skip that meal and ghrelin spikes, sending a loud signal to the brain something is wrong. Not because you're starving, but because the pattern was broken. This is why early hunger feels urgent and emotional. It's not a slow, quiet signal of true energy need. It's sharp, noisy, and attention-grabbing. Evolution designed it that way. In the wild, missing a food opportunity could matter. The body learned to react quickly. But here's the crucial detail most people miss. Ghrelin spikes are temporary. If food doesn't arrive, ghrelin doesn't keep rising forever. After a few hours, it begins to fall. Even without eating. The body recalibrates, the alarm quiets down, and something unexpected happens. Triad being, the immediate goals start rising, and even the adrenaline begins ebbing. Instead of shutting down, the system stabilizes. This is the moment where modern intuition clashes with ancient biology. We've been taught that the body needs constant fuel to function, but human physiology wasn't built around constant input. It was built around uncertainty. For most of human history, meals were not guaranteed. There were no scheduled eating windows, no snacks between tasks, no sugar available on demand. Food came after effort, time, and often waiting. The body adapted to that reality, not by weakening, but by becoming more efficient. When food was scarce, early humans didn't become sluggish and unfocused. They became sharper, more alert, more attentive to their environment. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. Hunger wasn't a time to conserve mentally, it was a time to search, to plan, to move. That same program still exists inside you. So when you eat only once a day and the early discomfort passes, the body doesn't collapse. It shifts, hormones begin to adjust, energy systems start reallocating. Many people report a surprising change during this phase. Instead of fogginess, they feel clarity. Instead of weakness, they feel alertness. This isn't psychological, it's biochemical. As the initial ghrelin spike fades, the brain stops receiving panic signals. Stress hormones that surged early on begin to normalize. Blood glucose is still being maintained, not by incoming food, but by internal regulation. The liver releases stored glucose to keep levels stable. The brain remains fueled. At this stage, the body has not run out of energy. It has simply stopped relying on the expectation of constant intake. This is where an important distinction becomes clear. Discomfort does not equal danger. Modern life has trained us to interpret any sensation of hunger as an emergency. But biologically, hunger exists on a spectrum. Early hunger is largely habitual. It's driven by timing, memory, and reward pathways in the brain, especially dopamine. Food isn't just fuel in the modern world. It's stimulation. Each meal triggers small dopamine releases associated with pleasure, comfort, and routine. When meals are removed, the brain doesn't just miss calories, it misses stimulation. That absence can feel unsettling. Restlessness, irritability, and a sense of something is missing often appear. But again, this is not a sign of physical failure. It's the nervous system adjusting to reduced input. Think of it this way: when constant noise stops, silence can feel uncomfortable. Even if silence is not harmful, the body reacts the same way. As hours pass without food, the system begins to recognize that this is not a crisis. It's a condition it has encountered before, just not recently. Signals soften. Attention sharpens. The constant background demand for food fades into the background. This is the first turning point. Not because the body has adapted fully, it hasn't yet, but because it has stopped resisting. At this point, something subtle but important occurs. The body shifts from expectation mode to assessment mode. Instead of asking, "Where is the food?" it begins asking, "What resources do I already have?" That question sets the stage for everything that comes next. What you feel in these early hours is not starvation, it's not damage, it's not your metabolism slowing down. It's your biology realizing that the rules have changed and preparing to respond accordingly. The discomfort is real, but its meaning is often misunderstood. And once that misunderstanding clears, the body begins to do what it was designed to do all along: adapt. In the next phase, that adaptation becomes visible, not just in how you feel, but in how your metabolism fundamentally changes its strategy for producing energy. If this already challenges what you thought you knew about hunger, make sure to subscribe to the channel. In the next part, we'll move beyond sensations and look at the real biology, how your metabolism actually switches fuel sources when you eat only once a day. And before we continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever noticed that hunger comes in waves, not in a straight line? Let me know in the comments. Your experience might be more scientific than you think. Once the body stops resisting the absence of food, something far more important begins to happen beneath the surface. The question is no longer, where is the next meal, but how do we produce energy now? And this is where metabolism quietly rewrites its own rules. In the early hours, your body keeps blood sugar stable using what it already has. The liver releases stored glucose, preventing any sudden crash. This is why, despite skipping meals, most people don't immediately feel weak or collapse. Energy is still available. But this supply is limited, and the body knows it. So rather than waiting for sugar to run out completely, it prepares a transition. That transition is known as metabolic flexibility, the ability to switch between fuel sources depending on availability. It's one of the most powerful adaptations in human biology and, ironically, one of the most underused in modern life. When food is constantly available, the body rarely needs to switch fuels. It runs almost exclusively on glucose. Eat, spike insulin, store energy. Eat again, spike insulin again. Over time, this locks the system into a single mode. Flexible systems become rigid, and rigidity, in biology, is never a strength. When you eat only once a day, that rigidity begins to loosen. As hours pass without incoming calories, insulin levels start to fall. This is not a minor detail. Insulin is not just a blood sugar hormone, it's a master signal that tells the body whether to store energy or release it. High insulin means store. Low insulin means access. With insulin staying low for extended periods, the body receives a clear message. External fuel is not coming. Internal fuel must be used. This is the moment where fat stops being a passive storage site and becomes an active energy source. Fat tissue begins releasing fatty acids into the bloodstream. Cells that were previously dependent on glucose start adapting to use these fats instead. This doesn't happen instantly. It's a learned metabolic behavior, and like any learning process, there is friction at first. During this phase, many people report fatigue, sluggishness, or a sense that energy feels different. This is often misinterpreted as something going wrong, but in reality, the body is switching engines. Imagine a machine that has been running on one fuel for years, suddenly learning to run on another. Efficiency comes later. Adaptation comes first. Inside the cells, mitochondria begin changing how they operate. These tiny structures are responsible for producing usable energy. When glucose is abundant, mitochondria are optimized for sugar burning. When glucose drops and fat becomes available, mitochondria shift their machinery to process fat instead. This shift has important consequences. Fat-based energy production is slower but more stable. It produces fewer reactive byproducts and provides a steadier energy output over time. This is why, once adaptation begins, energy no longer spikes and crashes the way it does with frequent eating. Instead of short bursts followed by drops, the system moves toward continuity. This is also where inflammation begins to change. Frequent insulin spikes are associated with chronic low-grade inflammation. When insulin remains low for longer periods, inflammatory signaling quiets down, cells become more responsive, tissues begin to recover sensitivity. This is one of the reasons controlled fasting has been shown to improve markers related to metabolic health. But none of this happens because the body is under attack. It happens because the body is finally allowed to do what it was designed to do: regulate energy internally. It's important to understand that at this stage the body is not burning fat because it's starving. It's burning fat because it has been given permission to access it. For years, constant eating may have kept that door closed. Now the signal has changed. As insulin stabilizes at lower levels, the body no longer oscillates between storage and release every few hours. It commits to a strategy. Energy production becomes deliberate rather than reactive. This is why many people notice a subtle but meaningful shift in how they feel. Hunger becomes quieter, not absent but less demanding. Mental focus improves, not because the brain is being stimulated, but because it is no longer being constantly interrupted by metabolic swings. The body has moved from anticipation to execution. At this point, metabolism is no longer waiting for the next meal to decide what to do. It is actively managing resources on its own terms. This is a fundamental change, not just in fuel use, but in metabolic autonomy. And once this autonomy is established, the effects don't stop at fat burning or energy stability. They extend deeper into how cells repair themselves, how the brain fuels itself, and how the body shifts from survival mode into repair mode. That's where the next phase begins. Once the body establishes metabolic autonomy, the shift goes deeper than energy production. The focus quietly moves from survival to maintenance and then to repair. After roughly 16 to 20 hours without food, a biological process that rarely gets time to operate fully begins to activate. Scientists call it autophagy. The word literally means self-eating, but that description can be misleading. Autophagy is not destruction, it is renewal through recycling. Inside your cells, damaged proteins, dysfunctional components, and cellular debris are broken down and repurposed. Think of it as internal housekeeping. The body dismantling what no longer works in order to build what does. Under normal eating patterns, this process is constantly interrupted. Digestion takes priority, energy is routed outward, repair is postponed. But when eating pauses long enough, repair finally gets a window. Autophagy is not a fringe concept, it is fundamental to cellular health. In 2016, Japanese scientist Yoshinori Ohsumi received the Nobel Prize for uncovering the mechanisms behind it. His work showed that when autophagy fails, cells accumulate damage, a condition linked to cancer, neurodegeneration, and metabolic disease. When autophagy functions properly, cells maintain integrity and resilience. Eating only once a day doesn't force autophagy, it allows it. At the same time, another shift is unfolding in how the brain is fueled. As fat breakdown continues, the liver begins producing ketone bodies, an alternative energy source derived from fat. Unlike glucose, ketones provide a slow, steady fuel supply, and the brain, despite its reputation as being dependent on sugar, adapts remarkably well to them. In fact, many neurons operate more efficiently on ketones. Energy becomes more stable, fluctuations smooth out. This is why, after the initial adaptation period, many people report a calm clarity rather than fatigue. Not stimulation, not a rush, but steadiness. This metabolic state also influences brain chemistry. Fasting has been shown to increase levels of brain design neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, a protein essential for neuron growth, synaptic plasticity, and learning. Higher BDNF levels are associated with improved memory, better stress resilience, and long-term brain health. In practical terms, this means the brain is not just surviving the absence of food, it is adapting, strengthening, and reorganizing. Emotionally, this phase often feels different from the earlier stages. Hunger loses its edge. It still exists, but it no longer dominates attention. Cravings weaken. Mental noise decreases. This isn't willpower at work. It's neurobiology adjusting to a more stable internal environment. When energy delivery becomes consistent, the nervous system relaxes. Stress signaling declines. The constant cycle of anticipation and reward tied to frequent eating fades into the background. For the first time in years, the body is not reacting every few hours. It is maintaining. This is where many people misunderstand what is happening. They assume that feeling calm means the body has slowed down. In reality, the opposite is true. The system has become more efficient, less reactive, less wasteful. Repair does not feel dramatic, it feels quiet. And that quiet is exactly what allows deeper biological work to happen. However, this stage also reveals an important truth. These benefits do not come from deprivation, they come from timing. The body is not being punished, it is being given space. When eating resumes, the system doesn't forget what it learned. Sensitivity improves, signals are clearer. The body responds differently to food because it has spent time without it. This is why the effects of eating once a day often extend beyond the fasting window itself. Metabolism, brain function, and cellular repair begin operating from a different baseline. But none of this means that more restriction is better. Which brings us to the most important question of all. If this system is so powerful, why doesn't it work the same way for everyone? At this point, it's tempting to treat eating once a day as a universal solution. The biology looks compelling, the mechanisms are real, the benefits for some people can be profound. But this is where science requires restraint. Human bodies do not respond identically to the same stimulus. Biology is adaptive, not standardized, and the same metabolic switch that restores balance in one person can create imbalance in another. For individuals struggling with insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, or early metabolic dysfunction, reducing meal frequency can give the body the metabolic rest it desperately needs. Lower insulin exposure, improved fuel flexibility, and enhanced cellular repair can help reverse patterns that constant eating reinforced for years. But for others, the equation is different. Athletes, for example, often operate near the edge of energy demand. Compressing all nutrition into a single meal can make it difficult to meet protein and micronutrient requirements. Over time, this may compromise muscle maintenance, recovery, and performance. People with diabetes, thyroid disorders, or conditions that affect blood sugar regulation may experience dangerous fluctuations if fasting is not carefully supervised. For them, stability, not extended restriction, is often the priority. Women in particular can be more sensitive to prolonged caloric restriction. Hormones involved in reproduction and metabolic signaling respond quickly to changes in energy availability. In some cases, eating once a day may disrupt menstrual cycles, sleep quality, or stress regulation. These outcomes do not mean the biology described earlier is wrong, they mean context matters. There is also a psychological dimension that science cannot ignore. Eating once a day requires structure, awareness, and flexibility. Without those, discipline can slide into rigidity. What begins as metabolic experimentation can turn into anxiety around food, control, or self-worth. Food is not just fuel, it is connection, culture, and care. Any approach that ignores that reality risks trading one form of imbalance for another. From an evolutionary perspective, the human body was never designed for extremes. It was designed for cycles. periods of abundance followed by periods of scarcity, movement followed by rest, effort followed by recovery. Eating once a day can fit into that rhythm, but only when it remains a tool, not a rule. The most important insight from this entire process is not that you should eat once a day. It's that the body is far more capable than we've been taught to believe. It can wait. It can adapt. It can repair when given the chance. Fasting, at its best, is not about denial. It's about timing. It's about creating space in a system that is constantly overloaded. And sometimes, that space reveals just how resilient the body truly is. So if you're considering eating once a day, the real question isn't whether it works in theory. The question is whether it fits your biology, your lifestyle, and your long-term health. Because the goal is not to eat less forever. The goal is to understand when to eat and when to let the body do the work it already knows how to do. If this video helped you see hunger and fasting through a scientific lens, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we don't chase trends, we explain what your body is actually doing and why. And if you have questions or personal experiences with eating once a day, share them in the comments. Your body's response might help someone else understand their own. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next breakdown.